Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for this kind invitation. So I will share my screen. So this will be the first time when I do a presentation where I have absolutely no clue what's on the slides, because as you can see, they have been translated to Russian, which I do not understand. But hopefully I will manage anyway. So basically what I wanted to talk about, which I think actually continues quite well on the previous question that was asked, or I mean the final question that was asked in the previous talk here. So in some sense, the question is, what happens after ChatGPT, or what are the consequences of ChatGPT? So what I will try to do here today is to, of course, give a bit of more high-level background, talk a little bit about ChatGPT, but more from the perspective of what are the consequences for education, and then also talk a little bit about this ethical aspects of AI that I was also asked to cover. So that's a brief outline. And of course, I will leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So I hope we will have the opportunity to also answer your questions. So as some kind of starting point, I think what we want to achieve here is that we don't want to feel like KG is doing after his games against Google DeepMind's AlphaGo, where he was kind of a bit sad and disappointed, and basically felt that we humans don't have a chance against the computer. That's not the feeling we want to achieve, but rather what we want is, of course, the feeling that we can use the computer in a constructive way to help us solve our problems and help us, I mean, both professionally and privately, and so on and so forth. So actually achieving what was stated at the end, that we, the humans, are in control, and that we feel that we can understand and get these digitized systems to do the things that we want them to do, rather than feeling that we are being pushed around, or we are just being following the instructions that they are given without any proper understanding. So that this is the feeling we want to achieve. I also think one interesting part is a bit background in the sense that what is happening in the world around us. And actually, I would say that I think I did this slide about 10 years ago, actually, to a large degree. But I still think it's kind of relevant that what we see is this kind of convergence between the digital world and the analog world, which means that actions that we do in the physical world have consequences in digital world, which of course has been the case all the time. But what we also see is that actions in the digital world also have consequences in the physical real world, which means that they are more or less they're very tightly intertwined. And I think this is a kind of a important aspect, because of course one consequence of that is, from an educational point of view, is that we need to understand the digital world just like we need to understand the physical world. So therefore we have biology and chemistry and physics and so on in school. We should also teach about the digital world and how it works. Another consequence or aspect is that the world gets more complex, or rather, yeah, it's about the software. So it's about that I mean, there is this famous saying from what's his name in the US, Anderson Consulting, Horowitz. Oh, sorry, I forgot his name. But anyway, he said that the software is eating the world. Basically, that things that previously used to be hardware is now software, so that it's controlled. And I mean, the example have used, for example, is telecommunications. Previously, if you wanted to change the function in your telecommunication systems, you have basically had to physically go and replace the circuit boards in these base stations that there is located around the cities and so on. Now everything is basically general purpose hardware, and then just change the software in order to get different functionality, or even cars. So today, the way I understand it is basically many cars are sold with exactly the same physical engine, but depending on how much you pay, you get different software for this engine, meaning that you get different acceleration and different fuel consumptions and so on. So if you're buying the more sporty, usually the more expensive version, the only difference is that you actually get a different software. The actual physical engine is the same as in a cheaper version. So I think what we see here is that innovation and value is created through software. And I mean, as I said, this is something that has been true for at least 10, 20 years. But what we actually see now is that AI is eating software. So I think there is a kind of follow-up statement after this software is eating the world, and AI is eating software, which means that AI is now becoming the tool which is used both to actually write the software, but also that all software, or most software, has AI components in it. So I think that's really a key understanding or change in the world. And what we also see is that the problems that we need to address is larger. We also see that the speed with which we need to make these changes and the complexity of these systems basically make it more or less impossible for us to do it manually. So instead, we actually need automation, but we also need tools to help us deal with this. And here again, AI comes in because AI enables automations of tasks that previously only people could do, but also that they can optimize and improve the processes over time. And finally, which was also kind of the ending statement of the previous talk, is that people must solve problems and work together with these digital tools and the AI system. So I think that's a very important message, that it's not a question of either people or AI, but it's really about how do we effectively use AI as a tool. So that's a bit of a background. So if we then go to AI, I mean, AI has kind of been in the focus again, I think roughly for 10 years. I mean, around 2012, 2013, we had the first kind of big, let's say, public breakthroughs with this deep learning. And then over the years, we have seen a number of very impressive applications. I mean, first this was this self-driving cars that came. Then we had the computer beating the human grandmasters in different games like chess, Go, Jeopardy, poker, bridge, StarCraft, Dota, and so on and so forth. So basically every game where we have a relatively well-known situation or clear rules and so on, the computer is beating the best humans. And then more recently, what we have seen is this GitHub Copilot, for example, where the computer is actually writing code for us so that we don't have to do it. And it's basically checking what you're doing, trying to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then suggest here is the code that you might be writing. And of course, this kind of generative AI, which is the big fuss today and the big kind of interest today about generating content, not only programming code, but also images and text and video and so on. And behind all of these applications, we have this concept or this set of technologies, which is AI. So I think it's important again to understand that AI is a very broad term. There's a large number of different techniques and methods being used. Of course, the one that has gotten the most interest is this deep neural network, which is actually a very old technology. I mean, it was actually invented in the early 50s. Based on a mathematical model of the human neuron that was developed in the late 40s or mid 40s. So I mean, it's been a technology that has been developed over 70 or 80 years. But now it's really coming to its full power, and it's extremely useful and extremely versatile. So if we continue with this, I think one aspect is also the speed with which things happen. And I think it's quite fascinating just to see a little bit what has happened the last year. So I mean, the last year we've seen tremendous progress in especially generative AI. Where, for example, we had DALL-E, the second version of that was released in April last year, so a little bit more than a year ago. And what it could do was that it could take these text prompts and generate images. And it could also take prompts of things that does not exist. So I don't remember exactly here, but it was like dragon, chimera, giraffe, or something like that. So you take one animal and two things that are kind of fictitious animals, and then it were generating new images of this combination. And what we can see is that, I mean, sometimes it works quite well. So, for example, I think this one where you have the wings sitting pretty well, you have a tail and so on. So, I mean, I think that's pretty good. The same with this one and this one. But then you have some others where basically this one where the wings are not attached to the body, they're like floating above. Or let's see, someone here, the wings are also very strange. Here the wings are kind of backwards, so the kind of where you would expect them to be attached to the body, it's actually sticking out in the air and so on, and others that are even stranger. Here we have two completely different wings. So what we see here is that yes, it's able to generate quite impressive results, but also sometimes it becomes really wrong, which is incorrect from a human perspective. So I think it's interesting that the quality of this, but also that it's this combinatorial, that's possible to combine things and create new entities which you cannot find in the data set. So the whole point here is, of course, to draw images of things that you know is not in the data set that you've trained these systems on. Another example is this one, which is more to show that it can also generate these photorealistic images. So here we have teddy bears dressed up as mad scientists in the style of cyberpunk. And the whole point here is that it can do this extremely detailed photorealistic images. And of course, today, if you have systems like Midjourney and others, they are of course much more sophisticated. But I think this kind of triggered a lot of the activities about a year ago. And then we have this GitHub Copilot, which I briefly mentioned already, which is then targeting on generating programming code or help you as an assistant to improve your coding skill, or rather to make you write programs faster. So I think this is very interesting, basically trained on all the programming or all the source code available at GitHub, and then learning about what do people normally do when they do this kind of programming, and what are common ways of solving different problems. And then so I think this is now we're after the summer. So I think this is around September, maybe it was, where we had Imagine, which I think is quite fascinating, because basically what they do is that, again, you take a prompt, but instead of generating an image, they are now generating a full video. A full video. So here it's like a pirate battle in a, I don't remember, fiery, stormy weather or something like that. What we can see here is that you actually have to fill in a lot of detail in order to be able to do this. So of course, I mean, the text string, I mean, it's just a few bits, but actually the video will be several megabytes if you have high definition video, which means that you have to expand the knowledge. You really have to fill in a lot of details that's not explicit in the text. So in some sense, this is the complete opposite of compression, where compression is that you have a large amount of data and you want to have a very, this is in some sense small and compact representation of this information. Here we're doing the complete opposite. We're taking something very compact and generating something larger and more detailed, and filling in all these details. At least to me, it's very impressive. Of course, the quality here is not great, but that's just a matter of time. And then, so I mean, to kind of summarize things, what we have seen is that the last 10 years, or well, a bit more, we have seen this impressive improvement in the kind of capabilities, of the AI systems. So here we have a number of different, what you say, cognitive functionalities like handwriting recognition, which people have been working on for a long time, actually since the 80s at least. And I mean, actually already in the early 2000s, they were pretty good. But then we've seen, of course, the progress has improved. Or we take speech recognition, another area where there's been a lot of work since the 80s at least. And again, it was okay, but then the last 10 years we've seen a tremendous improvement. And then we also have things like image recognition, reading comprehension, where you can see it's basically a straight line up, and this kind of language understanding that we see today with ChatGPT and other language models like Llama and Palm and so on. So we see that here the progress is even faster from basically a system that's completely useless to systems that are actually quite capable. And here they argue that it's actually the same level basically as humans. I think, I mean, when it comes to say handwriting recognition, speech recognition, I don't find it that surprising. I think it's a relatively well-defined task, but I'm much less certain when it comes to reading comprehension and language understanding, because I believe that these are, of course, much more complex phenomena. And I think that things that we are actually able to do now, even though it's impressive, it's still limited, and that there is a lot more that we humans can do that these systems cannot do. And I will touch upon some of them later on. But anyway, I think the conclusion here is that AI tools today are extremely capable, basically at the level of humans in a number of important skills. So why is this useful? And in some sense, I think the question is, I mean, why do we need this? So here we have a slide which is actually a mix, I see, of both Swedish, English, and Russian. So basically, the question here is, assuming that you are, for example, a medical doctor, and you're supposed to make the decision based on the best available information, or at least according to Swedish regulation, a medical doctor is expected to make the decision out of the best possible information. But the challenge is that the amount of information and different types of sources of information and knowledge available to make medical decisions is basically growing exponentially. So basically what the text underneath the curve is basically different types of methods like amnesis, doing interviewing the patient, observing, doing radiology, EKG, lab tests of different types, and then more modern, you can look into the genomics, proteomics, you can do more precision medicine, you can analyze many more parameters, and you get much more information, both about the individual, but also about medicine in general. So the whole field is progressing extremely rapidly. And the question then becomes, how should you as a human be able to actually make the best possible information when our kind of cognitive capabilities, which is this gray line, is roughly the same. I mean, we might have a small constant increase if we believe in the Flynn effect, but more or less it's still the same. But the amount of information available grows exponentially. And I think traditionally there are two ways of dealing with this. One is specialization. So we become more and more narrow in our focus. So we become an expert on a smaller and smaller field. So that's one way of dealing with this. And a second way of dealing with this is to use tools. So the more powerful tools we have, the better we can deal with this huge amount of information. And of course, all of us are using it. For example, search engines. So previously you needed to go to libraries or physically locate information in a completely different way. Today, we just use a text box, we write in what we're looking for, and we find the information, which is of course extremely efficient and useful compared to before. So I mean, tools will be one major deal. So that's why I think AI tools will be a necessary part of helping us deal with this explosion of information. But there's another very interesting aspect, and that's from an educational point of view. So if we continue the example with the medical doctor, assume that we have a medical doctor that after his or her education, they know everything there is to know. And then we assume that the amount of knowledge in the world doubles every 2 years, which is quite conservative. That means that after 2 years, this medical doctor that used to know everything now knows half of everything. After 4 years, the same doctor will know a quarter. After 6 years, the doctor will know an eighth of everything there is to know. And after 8 years, it will be like a 1/16 of all the information or knowledge there is, which is then less than 10% of the knowledge. So in less than 10 years, someone that used to know everything basically just know a small portion of all the information and knowledge there is. And I really think a consequence of this is that we will need to learn much more after we finish our formal education. So the kind of formal education will just be it's basically your starting point. But the amount of knowledge that we gather through our lives, most of that will be gathered or acquired after we finish our education. And this talk about lifelong learning, it's not just talk, it's reality. I mean, I strongly believe that those both individuals and organizations that becomes the best at learning to take on and leverage new knowledge, they will be the ones that are succeeding, while those that are kind of might start out to be actually super great, but if they don't continue learning, they will have a difficult time adapting and having a competitive company, for example. And another consequence of this is that our formal education system, which has a fixed length, will cover less and less and less of the knowledge that it could cover. And I don't know what the situation is in your country, but I know at least in Sweden, there's a constant kind of battle for what should be included in education, what should be included in primary education, what should be included in secondary education, what should be included in tertiary higher education. And of course, there is a huge demand. Add this, add this, add this all the time. There are so many things that, I mean, everyone agrees this would be great to include, but there's not space. How do we deal with that? So I think this is going to be a huge problem, how to select what knowledge to include. I think here my expectation is that the educational system will need to change, and I believe it will need to change quite dramatically if we want to deal with it, because I don't think the way we're currently doing it will work. So, for example, I believe that we need much more diversity. I think we should focus less on like all the kids knowing roughly the same things. I think we should have much more diversity, more difference. I think that as long as you're good at something, it doesn't really matter what you're good at, but you have to be good at something. And I think we should focus more on what people actually are interested in, rather than trying to force everyone to do more or less the same. So I think actually this can also be a way of increasing the interest for education. So I mean, I think there's a lot of challenges around this, but in the end, the challenge really becomes how should we design or develop an educational system that can deal with this exponential growth in knowledge. And of course, also from an individual point of view, how can we as individuals make the best possible decisions as the amount of knowledge that we can base these decisions on grow. So I think that, to me, is really a key fundamental challenges going forward. And of course, that's also why I think these tools like ChatGPT and others are important, because they are actual part of this, or I believe they're a part of the solution to actually deal with this information. Just like search engines was a way of dealing with the huge amount of information out there. But there are also some very interesting consequences of, for example, ChatGPT, and that they are basically passing all the different tests that we can have. So here is a chart showing how ChatGPT is doing on the standardized, I think it's just American tests, different types of American tests. And here we can see, for example, that already ChatGPT 3.5 were able to basically get most answers correct on the environmental sciences. It, on the other hand, was much poorer at, for example, chemistry and physics, and also English literature. While the new version, GPT-4 or ChatGPT based on GPT-4, now is doing much better in both chemistry, physics, and many other subjects. But interesting enough, maybe not that much better in English literature, which is a bit surprising, I would say. But anyway, the point here is that these tools are basically passing the exams that we normally use. And here is a different example, but from a British master of bar exam. So it's the British legal exam, lawyer exam. And what's interesting here is, of course, that GPT-4 is better than the average student. And of course, this is not the average person in the world, but the average student on the program. And I'm sure that these are highly selective programs. So the students that are taking these are already very good students. And still, these systems are better than the average student. So of course, I think this begs a lot of questions. So how should we, from an educational point of view, interpret this? And what should we do about it, so to speak? What are the actions or reactions to this? So my first reaction to this is, of course, that probably the things that we test through our examination is probably not what we're most interested in. Because, of course, just because these systems pass the bar exam, I think probably very few people would feel comfortable having this GPT-4 replacing your lawyer. Of course, they can probably do a lot of things, but you wouldn't replace your lawyer with GPT-4. So obviously, there are things that we think is very important for a lawyer that's not being tested in these exams. So I think, to me, that's one of the first things. I mean, do we really test the things that we find the most valuable? And my guess is that no, we're testing quite simple things. It's more this kind of factual knowledge. Can you remember things? Can you analyze things, and so on? And those things are what these systems are good at. Another consequence is probably that, I mean, now we're mostly doing summative examination. So we do an examination at the end to see or check what you have learned, and probably need to focus much more on formative examination. So basically the process or the throughout your learning, that's probably much more relevant than actually what you know at the end. And also, of course, what you're able to do is much more relevant probably than the kind of pure facts that you know, or the kind of more this analytical skills that you acquire. So I think there will be a lot of kind of repercussions. So of course, I mean, when I get asked by journalists and others about what I see as the consequences of this, I usually say, I mean, I think on the short term, I think the short-term challenge is really how do we adapt our examination to deal with the fact that students are using it. And I mean, they are using it. if you ask the students, they basically say, well, everyone is using it all the time. And I don't believe in banning these tools and so on. And actually, I think probably would be very difficult to ban these tools. We are already seeing today that they are being integrated into, I mean, the word processing system or your email system or your search engine or your programming environment and so on. So, I mean, soon we will not know, we might not even know that we are using these tools. They will be integrated in the tools that we use every day. And I mean, to a certain degree, we are using that already. I mean, we are using spell checking, we are using Grammarly and so on to improve the kind of pure language parts. What we now will get help is actually structuring the text and generating the text itself. So of course, it's kind of a big step forward, but in a sense, it's kind of a continuation on what we already have. So that's the kind of short-term effect. The long-term question, which I think is much more interesting, is of course, given that we now have these tools, what are the skills and knowledge and competences that we humans need? And how do we maximize that? Or I mean, because I don't believe that if you're, or rather, I believe if you are competing against the machine, if you're trying to do the same thing as the machine, you will lose. It's like trying to compete against a calculator in who can do the fastest and most accurate computing. I mean, there's no chance you will win. And the same, I think, is here. So what we need to find is complementarity. So how do we complement these tools, and what are the things that we add that these tools do not provide? And I mean, I'm certain that there is a lot. So I'm not particularly worried about it, but I do think the way that the education system is focusing today, it's focusing very much on this analytical skills and this kind of knowledge part, which might be the parts that will be much less valued in the future, while more, say, everything that you do with your hands, but also all kinds of interaction with people. So I mean, for example, teachers, I mean, just as the previous speaker was saying, I don't believe in a school without people. I think that would be kind of, I don't think that would be a good school. So probably we'll have many more, I mean, the kind of parts where they have this social interaction, those will be much more important. And this kind of purely analytical part might be less important. So I think that's the long-term question. So how do we change what we focus on in education to complement what these tools can do? And then some pros and cons with using ChatGPT. So I mean, even though these tools are extremely, what should we say, competent, I mean, it very, very often gives very good responses. It also sometimes gives completely rubbish. And the interesting thing here is that from the tool itself, from the perspective of the tool itself, it doesn't know the difference. It's equally convinced when it's giving a perfectly splendid answer as when it's giving a completely worthless answer or really bad answer even. Yeah, so I mean, and to it, they are equal. They're equally good, both of them. So there's clearly that it doesn't have a sense of this. So I think that's one interest. I mean, both the pro and the con. And of course, the pro is that it can also write very good text, both structurally and grammarly. And I mean, I even heard examples of teachers who require the students to take their essays and basically rewrite their essays through ChatGPT. So because then the teacher knew at least they will get a readable, well-structured, grammatically correct essay. And then I can focus on the content, because I know that it's well written. And I actually think that's a quite interesting thing to do. I think it has a lot of issues as well, but I mean, I think that's interesting. And another pro is, of course, that it's extremely general. I mean, it can handle, well, more or less everything, both kind of natural language, but also formal languages. So, for example, programming. So basically, you can take it and say, oh, here is my C++ program. Can you write this Python program that does the same thing? Or generate a Python program to solve this problem and use it for debugging. So here is my program. Here is the error message. Here is what I want to do. What is wrong? And then you can use it as a tool to help you program. So I think we have to realize that this is extremely generic tools that can be used in many, many different situations. But then there are some cons, or maybe I'm not sure. Well, it's not necessarily cons, but I think it's things that you should be aware of. Namely that, I mean, these systems, they're not designed to produce facts. I mean, that's not the purpose, but rather they're designed to generate text, which means that if you just take raw GPT-4, what it does is to generate or to calculate a probability distribution of, given the text that given the prompt and given the text it's seen so far, what's the most probable next token in this sequence. So the only thing it does is to predict what is the most likely next word or next sentence or whatever level of token you use. So I mean, that's the thing, which means that if there is a lot of text with factual incorrections available, I mean, it could very easily generate false information because that might be the most likely thing if you just look at the training data. So it's important to understand it's not designed to generate facts or factually correct information. The second thing, which I actually find quite interesting, so we organized a seminar on large language models and higher education almost 2 weeks ago as part of this WASP-ED program that I will talk a bit more about later. And one of the things that was highlighted there, which I hadn't thought about before, but which I find very interesting, is that a consequence of this, that it's basically trying to predict the most likely next token, is that you're pushing towards average or pushing towards normal, which might have as a consequence that these texts become very similar and that you kind of reduce the difference, the variety, and the differences that might be very interesting and valuable. So I think that's also something to be aware of and to have in mind. And in relation to that, I mean, well, we talked about this. Sometimes give extremely bad responses. There's also unclear legal status. You probably heard that Italy made it illegal to use ChatGPT due to GDPR. Now OpenAI has done something. It's not clear to me exactly what they've done, but apparently that was good enough for Italy to resume access to it. But I would say that the situation, the way I understand the situation from a kind of commercial perspective here in Europe, is that companies are very, what should we say, reluctant, or I mean, they are uncertain about the legal status. So I think very few companies, I actually don't know really of any, that's kind of officially using it as a kind of towards customer. But I do think a lot of individuals at companies, of course, are using this to help them in their everyday work. But I think they're more using it as individuals, which of course have other major issues. For example, a friend of mine talked to someone working at the bank who said, "Oh, I'm using this to help me in my work," and say, "Are you aware that everything you put into ChatGPT is being sent to the US?" And they say, no, I didn't think about that. So of course, you cannot put any sensitive or personal information and so on into these systems, especially not in a kind of commercial context, because that would mean that you're actually sending it outside of Europe to the US. So I think that's another thing to be aware of, that you have to be cautious in the way that you use it. I mean, we have also heard about cases of people using it to review papers. So basically you have confidential information, you have access to an unpublished scientific paper that you're supposed to review. And then people put it into ChatGPT to generate the review, which means that not only are they probably violating, I mean, what they're expected to do, but they're actually sending confidential information to the systems, which might actually be used in training of the next generation. So then you have unpublished scientific results being used incorporated in these systems and so on. So I think that's there is a lot of issues around the use, even though of course it's extremely useful. But one very interesting aspect which I forgot to include here is that these systems are trained on existing information, which means that for assuming that they're trained on data up to 31st of December 2022, it means that everything that happened after the 31st of December 2022 do not exist for this system, because they don't have any access to the current information. So you have to be aware that it's kind of, what you say, stuck in time. So that if you ask about recent events, it may not have any information whatsoever about them. So that I think is important. Maybe that's a way of getting around. So if you want to have questions that will be difficult for it to answer, include something that happened the last week or month, and then most likely it would not be included. So then the students need to figure it out themselves. But another consequence or aspect of this is that at some point, these systems will be trained on all the information that exists. And then the interesting question becomes, will it be able to generate new information? I mean, I would argue today it's basically doing interpolation. So it's basically, finding things in between, so to speak, but it's not doing like logical consequence that then can draw conclusions beyond what it has read, so to speak, or digested in terms of text. So as the way that they're constructed today, they basically cannot generate any new information. Of course, they can put existing information in new context or in new sequences, which to us may appear as new, but from a scientific point of view, it most likely shouldn't be considered as new knowledge, which means that we might reach basically a plateau where these systems have digested all the known information and they cannot kind of improve any further because there is no more information. And actually, this was exactly what happens to AlphaGo. So I mean, the trained AlphaGo on all the available Go matches ever played, and the system was nowhere near being competitive. It was first when it started to play against itself and actually generate new games and new training data beyond what existed that was kind of human generated. That was the first, then did it manage to kind of break through and actually become better than people. So actually, I think that is, of course, a major question here. How do you create a ChatGPT or these kind of language models that not only can reproduce things that we know, but that can actually start to produce new knowledge? So basically having a scientific version of this, generating scientific knowledge. So I think that's of course a major open issue. I mean, all of these are major open issues. So how do we make them more factful? How do we make them more trustworthy? How do we make them more legal? How do we make them more scientific in a sense? So I would say that the state of the technology is very early. So even though the functionality is very impressive, I still think we are very early in the development, and that they will improve a lot in the coming months and years. So that was a little bit about ChatGPT and kind of educational aspects of that. Now I'm going back to this question of what should we say, AI and people, because I think I actually think this is the most important part, that it's not a question of either AI or people, but it's really a question of how do we as humans use these tools in the most effective way. And the example I've been using here for a long time again is chess. And I mean, humans haven't had a chance against chess playing computer programs since at least 1997, when Garry Kasparov lost against IBM Deep Blue. But if you actually no, but what's interesting is that even though we as humans don't have a chance against the computer, it's still the case that human chess playing today is better than it ever was. And some people even claim that Magnus Carlsen is the best chess player because he is the person who is the best at playing like a computer. So in some sense, to become a good human chess player, you have to learn how the computer would play, and then you improve. But what we also see is that the interest for chess is also still very high. So just because we are not the best, it's still interesting to watch people play against each other. And it's also interesting to see people playing against the computers. However, it's not interesting to watch computers play against each other. And I mean, you can make another analogy. For example, I mean, even though a car is faster than a human, we still find sprinting or marathons, or I mean, all kind of running events are still interesting, even though, I mean, it's not about being the fastest thing on the planet, but it should be the fastest person on these different distances. But the second thing is this, that if you combine humans and chess playing programs, they are better than both the best humans and the best chess playing programs. So it's really this, the combination is better than either on their own. And what's interesting is that actually it was Garry Kasparov who set up these contests. So I mean, after he lost, he was really upset and unhappy about it. He thought the computer cheated and all kinds of things. But then I guess he realized that, yes, okay, I guess I have to realize that I lost. And then he started to make this computer chess player programs. So now he probably made a fortune based on that. But he also arranged these competitions where he had humans playing together with these chess playing programs. So he ran these contests and came to this conclusion that we have kind of different strengths. So the computer is extremely good on the kind of tactical part, the kind of short-term game. I mean, when you have decided what to do, I mean, to actually play that, the computer was superior. But we still could have better strategies to kind of long-term or overarching plan or idea behind the game that we could do well. So by combining these, they were better. And I mean, I really think this, to me, is the key. But there are a number of, what should we say, consequences or aspects. And the first is that it's a different skill to play chess with a computer program compared to playing chess on your own, which means that just because you're a grandmaster, it doesn't necessarily mean that you become better by using these tools. So we have to learn to use these tools as a separate skill. So I really think this is key. And the second is also that we need to change or adapt the way we work so that we can effectively use these tools in our daily work. So it's I mean, I actually think we have reached a stage where it might not be at the technical, it's not mainly a technical problem, but it's more an organizational problem. So how do we organize our workplaces, how do we organize our education and so on to take advantage of these tools? And I mean, the example I've often used is the Swedish school system. So I mean, we introduced computers quite a long time ago. And I mean, then they did a study on this and basically came to the conclusion that if you just introduce a computer in the classroom or computers, but don't change anything else, the results will go down. You will have worse results compared to if you didn't change anything. But if you actually adapt the pedagogy and change the way that you teach so that you take advantage of the fact that you now have these tools, then you get better results. So I really think this is so important to work with competence development and organizational development in order to take advantage of these tools. So we need to adapt to be able to get the effect. And then I actually think so. I think that's if we want to get the benefits, that's what we need to do. But there are other challenges, and one of the key challenges is really how do we evaluate the quality of these systems? Or I mean, we could take this AlphaGo as an example. And of course, everyone knows that the computer won. So it's not a question of whether the computer was better or worse than we, but it was clearly better. But what's more interesting is to watch how the human experts were trying to make sense of the moves that this computer game or player did. So I mean, there is a very nice documentary around this. But there were several times during the games where the human expert commentators basically said, haha, the computer made a mistake. A human would never play like that. And of course, we know that the computer won, which means that objectively, it's a good move. But from the human experts, it looked like a bad move because it didn't play like we normally play the game. And of course, now it was a game of Go, which to most people is just a game. But assume that this was now medical advice. So you have your very competent medical doctor that's getting a recommendation. Oh, I believe that, or the system says, we believe that the diagnosis is the following based on these reasons, and therefore the best treatment is the following. And now the doctor needs to make a decision. Will it follow the recommendation? Or will it overrule, or I mean, say that, no, I don't believe in this recommendation. I think you made a mistake. It's something else. And what we need to realize here is that there is no neutral choice. Either choice might be wrong. It might follow the recommendation, and it might be the wrong recommendation, or the doctor may choose to not follow the recommendation, and it turned out to be the correct recommendation. So I think it's very important to realize there is no neutral choice here. And the question then becomes, on what grounds should we make that decision? Because we can be absolutely certain that the computer has much, much more knowledge. It probably has read every medical information there is. So it's clearly that it's not having less, not enough information, but still it can be wrong. So I really think this is very interesting. On what grounds should we follow or not follow this recommendation? And I mean, I don't think there are any easy answers to the questions, but I really think that's one of the key challenges here. And of course, that's why things like explainability and interpretability and so on and so forth are so interesting, because those are ways of trying to help us make sense of these recommendations. But I really think this would be a challenge going forward. And partly due to this, in Europe, we have developed this ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI. So I was part of this high-level expert group who then developed this ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI. So I actually think Europe has made a very clear and wise choice here, that we are saying that, yes, we do want AI. However, we don't want any AI, but rather we want what we call human-centered AI, meaning that the AI should actually help the situation for us as individuals and as a society. It should have a benefit to society. It doesn't have any value of its own. And secondly is that we want to be able to trust these systems. And what we said that was that in order to be trustworthy, a system, an AI system, should have kind of three properties. The first is that it should follow the applicable rules and regulations, which of course makes perfect sense in most cases. But I think there are some interesting consequences, like, for example, you have a self-driving car that may get into an accident, and will it violate a traffic rule in order to avoid a potential accident? And my guess here is that no, they will not. They will probably be safer, so to speak, from the developer's point of view. to have an accident than to try to argue why they needed to violate the law. So I mean, yes, it's of course the right thing to do in almost every situation, but there will be corner cases. The second thing is that it should satisfy a number of ethical principles. We define 4 ethical principles. And last but definitely not least, it should also be robust in the sense that good intentions are not enough, but actually these systems need to be safe and secure and well implemented and actually work in practice. And if all these 3 are satisfied, then we could argue that it's trustworthy. Of course, the real problem here, or what's really difficult, is not to state these principles. I mean, many companies and organizations have done that. The really hard part is, how do you operationalize this? How do you make them technical enough so you can actually implement them in real systems? And that is, of course, the thing that many people are working on today. So just very briefly, the 4 ethical principles are respecting human autonomy, which means that we should complement and augment people rather than replacing them. The second is that they should be safe, and I mean, do no harm. So they should be safe in both physical and mental perspective. They should be fair, meaning that there should be equal distribution of both the costs and benefits. Of course, we all know that to define fairness is one of these things that's extremely difficult. There are many different aspects of fairness. Should it, for example, be equal outcome? Should everyone reach the same outcome? And that the resources should be distributed very differently so that everyone reaches the same level? Or should it be equal distribution of resources, meaning that people will reach very different levels, and so on and so forth. So it's not it's easy to say, but again, it's hard to operationalize. And the 4th principle is explicability. So basically, understanding or having a sense of understanding of the system, what it can do, on whose behalf it's doing it, transparency, explainability, all these different things, so that we actually can have a sense of understanding of these systems, is the 4th principle. And now the Commission is working on this regulation. So actually the Commission had their proposal. Now the Parliament has made up its mind about the proposal, and they have I guess a counter proposal. They have made many changes, and now there will be this trilogue, I think it's called, where you have the Commission and the member states and the Parliament making a decision on this. So it seems like the law is making progress. So everyone expects it to come into effect, I don't know, 2024 or something like that, relatively soon at least. And basically they're taking what they call a risk-based approach, meaning that depending on the level of risk of the application, the amount of regulation will vary. So there might be things that are has such a high risk or an unacceptable risk that should not be allowed at all. And the examples that have been discussed here is, for example, social credit scoring, where you put a number on individuals in a society, and then they get different types of benefits and so on based on their rating. As one example. The other example that's been discussed quite a lot is this remote biometric identification. So that's basically about identifying individuals in real time in public spaces, whether that should be allowed or not. And of course, their police and law enforcement are very much interested in allowing this, and other people are much less inclined to do so. So we'll see. So I actually don't know what the latest status is there, but there are a number of those specific cases that are being discussed. And then the second category is this high-risk category. That's basically everything that has to impact humans in some significant way. You can talk about, for example, medical systems. I would expect probably educational systems would also be considered high risk, recruitment, and so on. from insurance and so on. So here there would be a lot of regulation that would need to be, you need to show that you have done this before you're allowed to put the product onto the market. But then the expectation is that there will be a large number of AI applications, which is then very low or no risk, where there is basically very little or no regulation. Well, there is always regulation. I think this is probably one of those areas where there's a lot of misconception, namely that of course all existing laws and regulations still apply. So it's actually quite a lot of laws that apply to these systems, but then there is no further regulations beyond that. My expectation is that most systems will be considered high risk. So I don't think this will be, maybe it will be the opposite pyramid, that will be turned upside down. But I think high risk will be very common. But then we have, of course, the challenge, as I said, is that how do we actually achieve this? And I would argue that, of course, we support this regulation. And of course, most of this regulation makes a lot of sense. But I would argue that from a technical point of view, we still do not have solutions. So many of the things that the law require, I'm not sure. I mean, I would be skeptical to whether we can do them today. And some of them I'm skeptical that we could ever do. For example, there is this talk about training data should be complete and without error. And I think this is one of those things that I think that's fundamentally not going to be the case, because it's not well defined neither what complete is nor what error-free actually means. So I think there will be some challenges there. But in order to address this, EU is funding a number, or is funding this network that I'm coordinating, called TAILOR. So as was mentioned in the introduction, here we are developing the scientific foundations for trustworthy AI. And we believe that we need to, in order to do this, we need to integrate techniques coming from learning, optimization, and reasoning. So we don't believe that one single technique will be able to solve everything, but we need this kind of combination. So the overall vision is that, develop these scientific foundations and do that through this integration, so that we can help realize the European vision of human-centered, trustworthy AI. So that's the overarching goal. So actually, I see I'm running out of time. I expect like 1.5 hours is so long time. I shouldn't have a problem, but I see that we're already at 65 minutes here. So actually, I will skip this, or very briefly mention that. I mean, basically, it seems like we humans have two types of systems: System 1 and System 2. Where System 2 is this more analytical, explicit, deliberate, and System 1 is this more implicit, kind of effortless and automatic. And intuition is the best, I mean, one example here. And what we've seen is that traditional, this kind of good old-fashioned or old traditional AI has focused very much on System 2. How do we understand and mechanize formal reasoning? While today's methods, these deep learning and other data-driven methods, are extremely good at this kind of more intuitive and automatic and unconscious types of processes. So of course, what's really interesting is that how can we combine them, just like we humans combine them. So I think that's another one of these key challenges. How do we combine these different two systems? I mean, the reasoning and the learning, and getting everything to work in concert together. Yes. So this is just to help the community. We have also developed a handbook on trustworthy AI. So if you want to know about important concepts related to trustworthy AI, we have this handbook. You can have the link there. So that is kind of a source of more information if you want to know more. So yeah, it's just a summary of the project. I will not go through it. And then we have some kind of larger consequences on society. And I think one of the consequences here, which I think we will also experience in education, is of course that when we start analyzing how we as humans make decisions, we will realize that we are actually not that good at making decisions. And then the question becomes, what do we do with that? Of course, my hope is that we will take advantage of this and learn how to improve our decision making. But I fear that will also be like in France, because in France they made all the kind of legal information available digitally. Of course, researchers started to analyze how the judges were making decisions, and they started to analyze, for example, asylum cases, and came to the conclusion that it mattered more which judge you got than the actual circumstances in the particular case. And of course, this was not the desired outcome. And in the end, what happened was that they actually introduced a law making it illegal to analyze how individual judges make decisions. So rather than improving the legal system, they made it illegal to study it. And I really think we will see more of these kind of consequences. But of course, I hope for the opposite, so that we can use this to improve our decision making. If we talk about jobs, I mean, actually it was again about 10 years ago, there came a number of reports stating that 50% of all the jobs would be automated. I think most people understand and realize today that that's not the case. And the reason is that what's being automated are not jobs, but rather tasks. So actual things that you do at work, so different types of activities. So what will rather happen is that more or less every job will be affected, but how much it is affected depends on what type of activities you do at work. And of course, as with always, I mean, it's somewhere in the middle, so probably somewhere between 30 and 60% of the activities that you do at work can be automated, and thus will be automated sooner or later. Which means that in some sense we have a much harder problem, namely that every job or almost every job will be affected. But I think very few, if any, jobs will completely disappear. But we will see greater automation or greater tool use in all professions. And this was a very interesting study that was released just a few weeks ago, I think. And then what they had done was to look at how helping people gain work experience through using these tools. So basically, I don't remember exactly what type of work it was now, but as you can see here, the purple curve are those that were given AI assistance. So basically, they very quickly became very efficient. So they reached a level that was higher than the kind of normal worker. As you can see, the turquoise or light blue line here is the kind of a worker that's not using any tools. So that means after 10 months, they can deal with about 2.5 cases per hour. But if you had the tool already after 5 months, they could deal with almost 3.5 cases per hour. So it's significantly, almost 50% more efficient with after half the time, if they've been using the tool from the start. But if you see that if you start using the tool after half the time, so around here 5-6 months, you start using the tool, you see that yes, they improve faster, so they get more benefit out of it, but they get less benefit than the people who used it from the beginning. So I really think this is quite interesting, that it seems like the tools that we have so far are very good in the early stages, so to kind of get you up to speed quickly. But if you're already kind of is pretty proficient or pretty good at your work, maybe it adds a little bit less. Maybe because you have already, I mean, you have a certain way of working, and this might not be adapted to it. So I actually think this is a very interesting initial finding, at least. So yeah, if we look a little bit about going back to education, I didn't intend to speak much about it, but I mean, I think you were having Rose as a speaker later on. But what I think is important here is that I see that there are two major aspects. One is about education about AI, and the other one is using AI for education. And I believe the previous speaker here was more the later one. So basically using an AI-based tutoring system to help you learn better and faster. Personally, I'm much more interested in the first part. So kind of educating about AI, but also the kind of consequences AI has on the education system, rather than the actual how to use AI in education itself. But I do have a PhD student, Katarina Sperling, who is doing research on AI in the classroom, and she has summarized some of the existing works. We can see here that there exists a lot of different ways of supporting teachers and students, using different kind of methods. So this is more a summary, and actually it's a few years old, so but just as an example of using AI for education. Another aspect which I think is very interesting is that I have also worked quite a lot with this concept of computational thinking. I really believe that is the key skill when it comes in. I think we have digital competence, which is more how to use the technology, roughly how it works and so on. But then we have this computational thinking, which to me is really how do we solve problems together with computers. So that's what I've been a proponent of, and what I've been working on to introduce into the Swedish primary education. But I also think there is this very interesting duality between computational thinking and AI. So I actually gave a TEDx talk about that a number of years back, and I wrote this paper about it. And to me, the connection here is that computational thinking is really about how can we as humans become better at solving problems by taking advantage of computers and the way that computers solve problems. While AI, on the other hand, is really about how do we get the computers to be better at solving problems by understanding or taking learning, or using methods that we as humans use to solve problems. So both is about improving the problem-solving capability, but one is about improving the human problem-solving capability through computation, and the other one is improving computer problem-solving by using the way that learning from how humans solve problems. So therefore, I think it's quite interesting, kind of two sides of the same coin here. But that's more sidetrack. So what I wanted to conclude with, to talk towards the end here, is this program that I'm leading, the WASP-ED program, because I think it's quite relevant in these times. So this WASP-ED stands for the Wallenberg AI and Transformative Technologies Education Development Program, and it's a national program in Sweden, funded mainly by one of the Wallenberg foundations, with co-funding from the universities. So basically, the overall challenge here, or was a background, is that what we see is that there is a rapid increase in the need for competence in areas of AI, but also in other transformative technologies. So basically, the question here is, how can the Swedish educational system deliver the necessary competence when the demand for competence in new technologies explodes and vastly broadens? So, for example, there are three particular challenges: how to reach a common agreed subject matter content, how to introduce AI beyond the specialized education programs, so beyond the technical programs, for example, and how do we increase teacher capacity. Because the reason is that the kind of characteristics of transformative technologies are that, first of all, we see a rapid increase in demand for technical competence. So of course we can expand, say, engineering programs, computer science programs, and so on, which of course today contain AI, but that still wouldn't be enough because the needed volume is so large. So we have this really big increased need in competence. But the second is, which I think is much more challenging actually, and that's that there's a broadening the demand and scope to other subjects and professions. And basically the reason here is that when you have a transformative technology, it's usually one of these general purpose technologies, which means that it doesn't influence just one particular sector, but rather it affects everything horizontally. So it doesn't matter which technology it is or which profession or subject it is, everything is influenced by it, which means that now the doctors, the HR specialists, the economists, the lawyers, everyone needs to understand how do AI influence my particular profession. And I mean, what are new challenges and what are new opportunities of that? And really have this broadening perspective. So I think that's a challenge. The third characteristic is that, I mean, AI used to be a very well-defined topic. Basically, it was the same textbook that was used all over the world. So you had one textbook, the Russell and Norvig textbook, that basically defined what everyone was learning at university. But then, I mean, the last 10 years, that has been dramatically changing. So now there's a wide variety in the actual content of the introductory AI courses. But not only that, there is also the case that we now have many other aspects of, for example, AI in law, or AI in economy, and what are the ethical, legal, economical, social aspects of AI. So it's no longer just a technical subject. It's also a humanistic or social scientific subject. So we see that the kind of subject matter content is broadening and changing in a rapid pace. So we don't even agree upon what is the content anymore. And that, I think, is a third challenge. So basically, these are the three challenges that we see every transformative technology having, and thus those are the ones that we are addressing. So the objectives that we set up to address is that we should provide the educational foundations for AI. And I should mention here also that we are using AI as an example, but the intention is to develop methods and approaches that can be used for other transformative technologies as well. So because I'm sure there will be more going forward. But at least these are the ones we will initially focus on. And then the second is about scaling up the national education capacity. So as I said, we have an increased need for volume. So we need to educate more people, so to speak. And therefore that is the second challenge. The third is really about scaling, and here I think what the key is to how can we using I would say we will not be able to have enough people. So I mean it's difficult to have enough teachers. So we will need to actually find ways of giving larger courses, but with fewer teachers. And I think this is really one of the key challenges. And then the third one is to scale out. I'm trying to do so the three is by scaling out. So again, it's about broadening this beyond the kind of technical content to the other professions. And the fourth is to basically eat our own dog food and to use AI to improve education, so to drive this kind of data-driven education and learning analytics and so on. And here is just a summary. I see that after the translation, the text is now much longer, so unfortunately it doesn't really fit, but I mean, it's basically a summary of what I said. We have, since this is a program rather than a project, we have 6 work areas covering different aspects, from curriculum development to program development to course development. And then the green ones are more the supporting ones for pedagogical development, learning analytics, but also technical platform and education data. So how can we on a national level either develop or to kind of identify the needs for these technical platforms? And lastly, but definitely not least, also how we work with teacher competence development. And what I tried to do while I was talking was to find, because we have developed a first version of the curriculum. So we have a curriculum, but of course I failed to find it just because I need it. But I mean, there is a curriculum that we have developed, which is then much more broader than the kind of standard, more technical approach to AI. Let's see if we can do rapid editing while we speak. With some luck. I think I managed. Let's see. No. Okay.
Вот, получилось.
Yeah, sorry.
It worked out.
Да,
Well, it didn't show up. It's in my presentation, but it doesn't show up. No, I know why. Here it is. Yes, so I mean, we have done this first version of the curriculum. So basically, we have a number of different layers. So we have a kind of technical core. So I mean, it's more traditional. Then we have this what we call layer 2A. That's more human AI interaction. So the individual interacting with these systems. And then we have a third layer, which is more the social perspective. So actually taking this in a social context. And here we have this ethical, legal, and societal aspects. And then we have two kind of parallel. One is more the software one. One is more when you also have hardware, robotics, and so on. And then you can use this technology for in different, say, use in research, or you can apply it into more society. So what we're trying to do is really to broaden the perspective on the AI topic. So we also have this course, Elements of AI. So this was originally developed by University of Helsinki, but you can also get university credits from Linköping University for it. Here is a way of actually exploring a continuous delivery mechanism. So we have a course that's given all year round, and you have continuous admission to the course, and you have continuous examination. And we have about 1,000 students getting credits every semester, but we're running it basically with a TA doing most of the work. So we have automated most of the work. So this is really a way of also exploring how to give very large courses with much fewer teaching resources. So this is also interesting from that perspective. And to conclude, I really think, I mean, the message here is, of course, AI is here now. Things are going very rapidly, so we have a very fast pace of development. I think AI will affect or influence basically everything in society. So it really is this general purpose technology with broad implications. And I do think education will be at the core. We see already, I mean, basically the biggest hurdle to taking advantage of the technology today is education and competence, which means that I think competence development, lifelong learning, education will really be at the core of this AI-powered digital transformation. And to end, I really think that, I mean, I don't think AI will outcompete people. However, I think people who effectively use AI will outcompete those that don't, which means that in the end, it's all about AIs and humans together and how to effectively take advantage of AI tools so that we can solve the challenging problems that we are facing. Thank you very much.